Hi everyone, I just wanted to say thank you for coming and welcome to our session today. My name is Balkis Mazwer.
Hi everyone, my name's Dan.
And we will be running today's session on supercharging your ArcGIS maps and apps. I will be covering the cartography side of things and Dan will be showing you some nifty arcade tricks. We will be giving you a tour around the map viewer, highlighting some of our web app builders, and showcasing some cool configuration options to create and enhance this dashboard. Now, the use case of this dashboard is to give a breakdown of the electricity consumption for Scotland at a local authority level in the year 2020. And we will be using this dataset from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So let's get started in the demo. So as you can see here, I have my data already populating my map viewer. And let's take a closer look at the attribute table. So for each local authority, I have values for total domestic consumption in 2020 and total non-domestic consumption in 2020, both in gigawatt hours. So let's go ahead and select for these two fields within our styles pane. So we have total non-domestic consumption and total domestic consumption. And as you can see, what Map Viewer is doing is it's taking a look at the data fields that we have selected and will suggest some different cartographic styles to us. So in our scenario, we have chosen two numerical fields. And the suggestions include the Compare A to B style, which showcases the first field to the second as a simple ratio. We also have the relationship style, which uses a bivariate color scheme. And today, we will be using the charts style. Now, I'm choosing this particular cartographic style because I think it just gives us and the audience of the map a quick breakdown of the different electricity consumption proportions for our two categories. And charts was a very popular enhancement request for ArcGIS Online and has just been implemented in the June 2022 update. So within charts, let's go ahead and change the name of each category. And we can also change the color. I'm going to go for a bright blue and a bright pink. And since our theme is electricity, I want to add a map effect to this layer later on, and that is the bloom effect. And to really enhance this bloom effect, it is best to use bright and saturated colors. And within charts, we have other configurations such as the chart size, so we can change that. We can change the chart shape, have it as a pie, a donut, or somewhere in between, and the grouping. We can also have the option to change the symbology of the local authority boundaries, but I want to showcase this in a separate layer. So let's turn this option off for now. Okay. Now, as I've just mentioned, we're going to have another layer with the local authority boundaries. And this is because I want to add further context to my map. And I want the fill of each boundary to show the total consumption per capita. However, if we have a look at our table again, you can see that I do not have this specific data field. I only have total consumption. However, within my data set, I also have a population field. Now, instead of leaving the map viewer and calculating this field in a separate software, either in Online or ArcGIS Pro, we can use the inbuilt divide by tool within map viewer itself. So let's go ahead and select the population field. And as you can see, it has achieved the desired effect. Now, before I jump into the styling of this data set, I just want to introduce you all to some of our new vector symbols, such as the hatch fills. Now the hatch fills, along with charts, have just been implemented in the map viewer in the June 2022 update. And as you can see here, we have a wide selection, such as some horizontal and vertical lines, along with some waves and dots. We also have landscape fills for specific land uses. And if you're feeling artistic, we also have a selection of pencil landscapes as well. As my charts are the main focus of my map, I don't want the layer underneath distracting from that. So let's go ahead and still use the basic symbols for now. Now let's go ahead and choose a color scheme, and then within Map Viewer, we have multiple different color schemes available to use, such as color schemes for light backgrounds, dark backgrounds, and colorblind friendly ones as well. And since our data is comparing high to low values, it is best to use a monochrome color gradient. This just makes it easier for the audience to identify which areas have a higher or lower value in relation to each other. So let's go ahead and change the transparency. And we can also have the option to change the outline color and its transparency as well, and the width of our lines. So I've done styling the data layers, but you can see that my base map does not really fit the overall color scheme that we have here. So let's go into our base map tab and see and have a look at all the different available base maps for us to use. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to be using a bloom effect on our pie chart layer. So perhaps a dark gray canvas base map would be suitable. And as you can see, it does its purpose and it looks nice, but we can really further enhance our cartography by creating our own base map to fit our overall color scheme. And we can do this using the Vector Tile Style Editor. Now, the Vector Tile Style Editor is available to anyone with an ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise account. Simply choose one of the base map templates, and then you can begin configuring each base map component. So for example, for my land component, you can just use the color picker to select a color, or type in a specific hex code like I'm doing for the marine areas. Once you're happy with your base map, you can go ahead and click Save, and this will be just saved as an item within your content. So let's go ahead and add this layer back into our map. Okay, now let's add the map effects. You can access the map effects by going into the right-hand side toolbar here and clicking on Effects. And we have a wide range of effects to be used, such as the Hue Rotate, where one can easily and quickly change the color of your layer. We also have a Blur to blur the data if you wish. And as just said, we will be using the bloom today. So let's go ahead and adjust the strength, the radius, and the threshold. We'll be also adding a drop shadow to further enhance the bloom effect. So let's go ahead and select a purple color and adjusting its opacity. Okay, another option that you can configure are the pop-ups, but Dan will be going into this in a bit more detail later on. So overall, I'm quite happy with my map. I am aware that the end result is a dashboard, so I don't want to add too many map components to this map because there will be many charts configured around the map, and I don't want the overall end product to look too cluttered. So let's go ahead and click Save. And then to push this into a web app builder, all you need to do is go and click on the three dots and create app. And a selection of different app builders will appear. We will be going into more detail about dashboards, so I would like to introduce you all to some of our other app builders. So first up are the ArcGIS Instant Apps, where you can create an application within minutes. Simply choose one of the 16 pre-configured templates, and you can create applications for a wide variety of use cases. For example, here we have the nearby template to create an application that identifies the closest library to its users. If you would like full control of the look and feel of your application, then ArcGIS Experience Builder is perfect for you. Not only you can create map-centric applications, but you can also create non-centric multi-page websites. And within Experience Builder, there are currently 43 out-of-the-box widgets available to be used, but more are being added via incremental releases. Simply choose a pre-configured template, or you can start from scratch. And last but not least, we have the fan favorite, the Web App Builder. Now, Web App Builder has a medium level of configuration, more than the instant apps, but less than the Experience Builder. And it has over 70 out-of-the-box widgets to be used. However, please note that the Web App Builder is built upon JavaScript 3. So some of the functionalities that we have shown to you today, such as the map effects, are not compatible with the Web App Builder. I would just like to highlight that no matter what app builder you use, they all have seamless integration with the wider ArcGIS system. And you don't really need any developer knowledge to spin an app up. So I would like to, I'll give you guys a second to take photos. Okay, I would just now like to pass over to Dan, who is going to be talking about Arcade for ArcGIS.
Thanks, Balkis. So before we begin, can I just get a show of hands from people who have heard of Arcade for ArcGIS before? And let's leave your hands in the air if you think it's a developer-only tool. Okay, interesting. So the consensus is kind of 50-50 with this, and what we're going to go through today, specifically configuring pop-ups in the map that Balkis has just created. And I want to show you the speed and flexibility that we can easily manipulate the view of our pop-up without touching the underlying data. I think it's safe to say as GIS professionals, we're kind of trained to understanding the table, the traditional pop-up that we tend to see. So we're going to look at how we can improve the end user's experience by just manipulating this with a small use of Arcade. We're going to chuck in a little bit of HTML for some color magic as well, but you know, I'm not a developer, so this is very much just a user's level of scripting and coding knowledge. So a little bit about Arcade before we get stuck in. It's an expression-based language similar to JavaScript. So for any of you that are aware of JavaScript, you should be able to pick up Arcade up very easily. Like I said, I'm not a developer, and I've been able to pick up Arcade easy enough as well. So it's very logical. Results are calculated on the fly. So this means that the results are stored client-side. So we're not going to be changing underlying data. We're more looking at how we're going to represent it to an end user on client-side. And then the third point is from desktop to app. So this means it follows us through the system as we're working from the desktop into a map view and then into an app. I could set the pop-ups expressions in desktop, for example, and just leave them be, and it will follow us through automatically as we go through the system. And lastly, it's secure. So we can't build apps with Arcade. We can't run executable code. It is for GIS-specific queries, really. So it's good at recognizing layers and maps, sort of phrases that we're used to hearing. So this is a little bit of a scope of what we're going to go through in the next 10 to 15 minutes or so. We're going to start with some basic one-line of code examples. And what I want to do is I want to manipulate place names. So we'll have a look at the data in a second and show you how quick we can do that. We're going to move out to 2 lines of code and then 3 lines of code. So no huge blocks of code here that we're going to tackle. And we're going to look to normalize numeric fields. So you can see in the pop-up picture on the slide that we've got quite a lot of numeric fields that we need to style or just change for our intended output. And then we're going to look at how we can combine the multiple expressions together into a nice pop-up legible for our end user. And then finally, we're going to move on to the dashboard like Balkis mentioned, and we're going to look at how we can employ Arcade to increase our dashboard and some nifty tricks that we can throw in there as well. So let's head over to the map that Balkis has created for us. On the left, you can see a traditional pop-up, I'll call it. And what this is the underlying data with no editing, no arcade added in at the moment. We can see here that we've got place names in full capital letters, and we know that we want to manipulate this and change it into correct capitalization, for example. And we've got loads of numeric fields, and hopefully you can pick it up on the screen behind me, but there is a decimal point roughly halfway through these numbers, so they need rounding up and sort of tidying for what we want to try and show today. And as I scroll to the bottom, you can see that we've got a text block that I've crafted for today. So this is the template of what I want to achieve with Arcade, and we're going to go through and build some expressions to replace the words that are in capital letters and show you how easy it is to add them in. So we can start by removing the field list on the right-hand side in this pop-up menu. We don't need that anymore because I've got our template, so we know what we're going to work for and what we're working towards. If we move over to attribute expressions on the right-hand side, you can see here that I've got a few expressions already loaded in. Now these aren't filled out, so what I want to do is take you through how I'm going to fill these out today. So these are like placeholders for now. So we'll start with region name. And as I open it up, I've left a handy note on the first line that says I want to format this text to display correct capitalization. For those of you not aware, this is the Arcade expression window. On the left-hand side, this is where we can write our code and drop bits of Arcade in. And then on the right-hand side, we've got globals and functions, which we're going to look at today. So the globals tab is the data that's accessible in our map, and functions is where we're going to find pieces of Arcade that we're going to use today. So we'll move over to the functions tab first of all. I'm going to search for the proper function, and it's not me saying this is the proper function, this is a function named proper. And on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a blue eye, so we're going to click that, and as you'd expect, it's going to give us some information about this function, and this works for all of the functions available. It tells us that we're able to format text, so great, this is what we're after. Let's go back and just click on it once, and it drops it into the expression window for us. So we can see that we've got the proper function listed first. Then we've got two values or bits of text that have dropped in. So the first one is field or value. We're going to point a certain part of our data towards this expression. And then the second part is every word. And what this means is it's going to format every word in that field that we choose. So let's go ahead and double click the field or value, move over to our globals tab. We're going to press the arrow on the right-hand side of feature and scroll down to the correct field that holds our feature names. In this case, it's this one here. So I'll just click it once and drop it in. And that's all we need to do. So let's press test and see what happens. A results window appears, and it tells us that it's returned a string, or a bit of text, really. And the result is there for us, and it's worked exactly as intended. So we've gone from full caps to correct capitalization for region names. So we can just press OK on that. That's expression 1 done for today. Now, if we look at the text box, we can see we've got consumption to work out next, and I want to look at the consumption for 2020, specifically formatting this numeric field. We saw that there was a decimal point and quite a few numbers after that, so what we're going to do is drop in a couple of lines of code here for us today. The first line, we're setting a variable, and we're going to call it consumption. Inside of that variable, we're using the round feature. And for those of you that aren't aware of what a variable is, it's, to me anyway, I think of it as like a little container for the expressions or functions that we're calling upon. And we can just use the name that we've put to that variable to reference it later on. So we've used the round function here, and we've put the relevant field in. And you'll notice that there's a small gap at the end here, if I highlight it. That's there by purpose, so we're actually going to round this up to a whole number, but you have the option to round it to a specific number of decimal places, whatever you need to use it for. So we've got a second variable here, and I've cleverly called it meaningful name, and this is to remind you all that we should use meaningful names when we're setting variables. So for today, I'm going to change this to consumption round. This is so that when I come back to it in a few weeks or maybe even months' time, I can pick this expression up and know what I've done. If I left it as meaningful name, I'll come back and just be confused. So this second variable, we're adding our first variable, consumption, and we're going to apply a space and then gigawatt hours afterwards. So this is just some text we're adding at the end to format that correctly. And then we're using the return function. So this is a new function that we're going to use in this expression. And what it does is it points Arcade to our desired output. If I was to leave out the return function, Arcade might struggle because there's two variables in there. for example. So we're just going to force it to look at one thing and return us a result. As expected, we've got a string, so a piece of text, and a number rounded up to a whole number with gigawatt hours at the end, so it's working perfectly. The third expression, we're going to look at the gigawatt hours difference between 2015 and 2020. So as I drop a few more lines in there, it's really similar stuff to what we've just done. We've got a couple of variables with meaningful names assigned to them. The first variable, gigawatt hours difference, I'm just using basic maths. So we're taking one field away from another in terms of value. And then we're going to round that number up to a whole number again and put our typical end onto that. And then we're using the return function again. So let's hit test and just make sure it works. And we've returned a value with a string on the end, so a space in gigawatt hours. This is as we expected. And finally, let's look at predominant usage. So I've got two little notes here. We're going to find the predominant usage, but is this too much for Arcade to handle? So this is a good point to note that Arcade is working client-side, so there may come a point that the data set's either too large or we're asking too much of Arcade in terms of multiple calculations. So the data set we're using today isn't too large, and I'm not using too many calculations. However, bear this in mind when you're applying this to your own workflows. So I've pasted one line in there, and what we're going to use for this is the when function. So let's talk about that quickly. We're adding in some fields again from our data. We're asking it to compare the left to the right and ask if one is greater than the other. And if it is, return us a value. In this case, I want you to return me non-domestic as text. And then we're doing the same, but we're turning that around, and we're adding domestic as the return. So let's test it and see what happens, make sure it works for us. Great, so we've been returned a string with non-domestic, and that works as expected. So if we come back over to the main pop-up menu, let's open up the text box, and what I'm going to do is paste in a pre-formatted one, but I've not completed this yet because I want to show you how easy it is to add in expressions. So you can see here that we've got where we had region is now replaced with expression 0. Expression 0 is the first expression we made, so the counting starts from 0, then to 1, etc. And then we've left predominant out. So I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to open up a curly bracket. And that gives us a list of the available fields that are stored in our map, in our data. But as we scroll to the bottom, we can actually see the expressions that we've created. So we can simply click it once to drop it in, and we'll press OK to let it update on the left-hand side. So we can see this has updated, and we've got values in place of where we had capital lettered words. But let's move around the map a little bit and just make sure the values are changing. And as I move from an area that is predominantly non-domestic, we move to an area that we'd expect to show domestic, and it's all updating. So that's working great. So I mentioned that we're going to look at using colour to enhance our pop-ups, and I've got a final expression here called format colour based off result, and that's exactly what I'd like to try and achieve today. I want to auto-update this colour from a parameter that I set. So I'm going to drop in an if statement, and it took me a little while to get my head around this, but it's actually really quite simple. So we're doing the same as when we used the when function. We're comparing the option on the left to the option on the right, and if it is true, we're going to return a hexadecimal code in this case, specifically blue to match our theme. And if it isn't, then we're going to return pink to match our non-domestic theme as well. If we test this here, we're going to see something interesting. It's not colour, essentially. We're seeing a string result of the hexadecimal code that we've put in. So quite literally, it's showing us what we've asked of it so far, and that's working fine. But how do we get to use this in our pop-ups? If we come back to the pop-up menu that we're familiar with now because we've added our expressions in, you'll notice there's a source button on the top toolbar. So as I click the source button, this opens up the HTML source coding, for lack of a better term, to our pop-up. And what we can do here is we can change the style, or we can add things to the style. So I've just pasted in one line of HTML code, and believe me when I tell you this is the limit of my coding ability. So I've added in a div container, and this is kind of like a container for the text, and we're going to set some parameters to that container to affect the text inside. You'll see here that it says style, followed by background color, and then the expression that we've just created to compare and see if we need one or the other hexadecimal code. And then the last two pieces are just formatting the text color to black and using some padding around the side to sort of spread it out a little bit and make sure it's not too cramped. So I've added in div code. It's important to note that I need to close this for it to work, else we'll get an error. And you'll see that I can't actually press OK here right now. We need to press the source button again to come back, and nothing's happened, which when I was going through this for the first time scared me. But now we'll press OK and watch it update on the left-hand side. So that works as expected. But let's double check it again in the same manner and move around the map. Perfect, it's working as we intended. So let's move over to the dashboard that Balkis mentioned before. Now this is a dashboard that we've put together for briefing purposes and overviews, much like you will have used dashboards yourself. Before we move into where Arcade's used, I want to have a look at the tools on the left-hand side, specifically the theme and layout options. And it's just a good point to note, really, because we're working with hexadecimal codes, we're able to add in an exact color to match our theme and branding from start to finish, really. So it's a good point to note. You'll see that we've got some key metrics around the side, and if I click one of the areas in the map face, you'll notice that our pop-ups have followed us through into an app as well, which is great. And I want to note this list on the left-hand side, because this is where we're going to show the use of Arcade and how easy it is to really change that from a standard list into something that has more visual appeal and hopefully catches the eye of our end user a little bit more. If we move over to our example, you can see here we've got the same list that we used a second ago, which is describing the region names that we have access to in our data. But we've used a bit of Arcade to format this in terms of adding in a custom icon, for example, placing it and calling upon certain functions. So let's have a look at how we've managed to do this. We'll open up the options and come over to List on the left-hand side. You'll notice that the advanced formatting has been filled out. If I maximize this window, it's something we're now familiar with, the Arcade expression window. And this is the most amount of lines of code that I'll probably ever be able to take you through today, certainly. But what we're doing here is actually very simple if we break this down. We're setting some variables, namely title, for example, and we're using the proper function that we used at the start of my portion of this demo. And we're setting some others as well, such as domestic and non-domestic text, so we can call upon these in a minute. And what we're doing is we're just writing some text out that we'd like to be displayed. We've nestled some Arcade inside there again, the round function that we've just seen, and our go-to end of phrase bit of text there. So this is where we would add in some Arcade formatting options, but really what we need to do is come down to this line item template box at the bottom. If I hover over the eye, appreciate you might not be able to see it on the screen, but what it says is reference attributes from an Arcade expression using something we're familiar with, expression/attribute name. And that's exactly what we've done here. So in a really simple manner, we've called upon the title that we've set, the two forms of text that we've created, and then our custom icons. And we've just gone into Photoshop really and changed the color to match our theme. We uploaded them to our area on the portal, so our content, and then we've set the size, so the width and the height, and the alignment to the left. And that's it. We've created, I think, a much more engaging and useful list from what we started with. So we've looked at some interesting and highly anticipated cartographic updates today. We've looked at the flexibility of Arcade and how it's not just for developers. Hopefully now you can take this away from the session and include it in your workflows. From my point of view, from an Arcade side of things, this has just been a flavor of Arcade. Really, what we're seeing here is an intro to Arcade. And you can do a lot more, such as configuring thresholds. Maybe you've got some time-based thresholds in your organization. You can configure Arcade to display certain things or colors. So we hope you've enjoyed today's session on supercharging your apps and maps.